The word that suddenly came out of my son's mouth in a sharp tone broke the silence of Sunday morning. O'Brien. Patricia Russo lifted her head as she drank her coffee. Her 4-year-old son Anthony was standing at the living room window, his small hand pressed against the glass, staring into the void. "Baby, what did you say?" "O'Brien," he repeated. He spoke very coldly. "Captain O'Brien. He told me not to go up. I had to go up. People were screaming." Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. Her son looked at her. For a moment, an expression appeared in his eyes that she had never seen on a child's face. It was weariness and sorrow. It was the look of someone who had seen too much and lived too long. "I was in the North Tower, Mom. The South Tower collapsed first. That is when we knew. We didn't have much time. The stairs on the 47th floor were melting. The railings were too hot to touch. I could hear the building screaming." Patricia's hands went numb. Anthony had never watched the news. They didn't have cable at home. The only videos he watched were cartoons on DVD. He had never heard of the 11th of September. They lived in rural Pennsylvania, hours away from any big city. He had never even seen a building taller than 3 stories. "Anthony, where did you hear that name?" Her son's face crumpled. Suddenly, he was 5 again, small, scared and crying. "Because he was there, Mom. Captain O'Brien was there. He tried to save me. The building collapsed. Now I am here. I don't understand why I am here." What this mother didn't know, what was impossible for her to know at that moment, was that Ladder Company 4 Captain Michael O'Brien had died in the North Tower on the 11th of September 2001. His body was never found. According to official fire department reports kept secret for 20 years, Captain O'Brien had made a final radio transmission from near the 47th floor. He described the stairwells, structurally compromised by heat exposure. "You are about to follow an investigation that will take a family into the deepest archives of the FDN, where they will discover something that should be impossible." A 5-year-old child in Pennsylvania claimed to be from Pennsylvania. That child somehow carried the memories of a man who had died before he was born. Life in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, flowed at a different pace than the rest of the world. The Russo family lived in a modest 2-story house on the edge of town, surrounded by farms and forests, stretching for miles in every direction. Patricia worked as a dentist. Her husband Vincent ran the hardware store on Main Street. Anthony was their only child, born on the 15th of March 2005, 3.5 years after the towers fell. He was a normal baby. There were no signs. There were no warnings. There was nothing to indicate that their son carried memories of a death that had occurred before he was born. The first incident occurred just 3 weeks after Anthony's 4th birthday. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, Patricia had picked him up from kindergarten. She had stopped at the grocery store on the way home. While walking down the canned goods aisle, Anthony suddenly stopped. His eyes were fixed on something behind Patricia. "Anthony, what is going on?" "Mom, there is smoke coming," he whispered. His face was pale. His little body was trembling. Patricia knelt down and placed her hands on her son's shoulders. "Baby, there is no smoke. We're in the supermarket. You are safe." But he wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at someone else. Just like he had acted 3 weeks later, that Sunday morning when he first said the name O'Brien. His breathing quickened. His hands clenched into fists. "I can't breathe. The mask isn't working. There is too much smoke, and I can't find the door. The radio isn't working, and no one is answering." People were starting to look. An elderly woman approached with a worried expression. Patricia pushed her away with her hand. She took Anthony in her arms, leaving the half-full shopping cart in the aisle. She carried him out of the store, in the parking lot. The spell was broken. Anthony blinked. He looked around. He began to cry like a normal 4-year-old, confused and scared. "Where are we, Mom?" "We're at the store, baby. Now we're going home." That night, Patricia told Vincent what had happened. Vincent dismissed it as overactive imagination. Maybe Anthony had seen it in a cartoon. Children have nightmares. Children go through certain phases. But it didn't pass. Over the next 3 weeks, these incidents became more frequent and more pronounced. Anthony would wake up screaming about melting stairs. He refused to go near the neighbor's fireplace. He said the heat reminded him of something terrible. He started drawing pictures that a 4-year-old couldn't draw. Towers in flames, falling people. tools that looked disturbingly like firefighting equipment. That October Sunday morning, he said the name. Patricia spent the rest of the day searching on the family computer in the basement. Her hands trembling, she typed Captain O'Brien 9/11's firefighter into Google. She found him immediately. Captain Michael Patrick O'Brien, 39 years old, Ladder Company 4. He was last seen on the stairs of the North Tower. His death was confirmed. His body was never found. In the photo on the memorial website, there was a man with kind eyes and a broad smile. He was wearing his uniform with an American flag in the background. Patricia tried to make sense of what she saw. She tried to make sense of something that made no sense. That night she showed Anthony the photo without telling him who it was. "Do you know this man, baby?" Anthony looked at the screen. His eyes widened, his lips began to tremble. "That was my captain. He told me not to go up, but I had to go. Because people were trapped. We don't leave anyone behind." This was no longer something they could ignore. This was no longer a dream or a coincidence. Their 5-year-old son remembered things he couldn't possibly know, but this was only the beginning. Dr. Raymond Torres had spent 37 years studying the human mind. He was a professor of developmental psychology at Carnegie Mellon University and a licensed child psychiatrist. He had seen every variation on childhood fantasies, false memories, and parental projections. When Patricia Russo called his office at the end of October and described her situation, his initial assessment was clear: psychological trauma caused by environmental cultural influences. He knew children had extraordinary powers of perception. They hear conversations they shouldn't hear. They watch the images they see on screens in waiting rooms. They absorb information from the conversations of adults who wander around their homes like ghosts. The 11th of September attacks were part of America's cultural fabric. Even a child who had not been taught anything directly about that day could have absorbed the existence of the event by osmosis. Still, the specificity of Russo's case intrigued him enough to persuade him to make an assessment. The appointment was set for the 3rd of November, 2009. At Dr. Torres's office in Pittsburgh, a 2-hour drive from the Russo family home. Patricia and Vincent arrived with Anthony at 9 in the morning. The child was small for his age. He was quiet. He clung tightly to his mother's hand as they entered the university psychology building. Dr. Torres's office was specially designed to put children at ease. There were toys in one corner, colorful posters on the walls, crayons and paper on a small table. Dr. Torres had learned long ago that children revealed more when they felt safe. Dr. Torres crouched down to the child's eye level. "Hello, Anthony. My name is Dr. Ray. I heard you have scary dreams." Anthony looked at him with those strange old eyes. "They're not dreams. Dreams disappear when you wake up. These don't go away." Dr. Torres sensed the first small crack. He sat Anthony down at the small table. He began the evaluation with standard questions. Slowly, he moved on to more specific questions. "Can you tell me a little about your family, Anthony?" "My mom and dad, we live in Clearfield. Do you have any siblings? Number? What is your favorite thing?" "I like digging. I like my excavator." They were all normal answers. They were all age-appropriate. Dr. Torres took notes in his notebook. Then he changed the subject. "Anthony, your mom told me you mentioned some buildings. Can you tell me about them?" The child's expression changed instantly. His shoulders tensed. The crayon he had been holding so comfortably became still. "I see the towers," he said. "Which towers?" "The Twin Towers in New York. I was in the North Tower when the plane hit the South Tower. We heard the sound. We felt the building shake. Then it hit our building too. Everything went wrong." Dr. Torres maintained a neutral expression, but he was taking notes. The terminology was interesting: North Tower, South Tower, the order of impact. This was a more specific case than he had expected, but it could still be explained by exposure. "How do you know about these towers, Anthony?" "Because I was there. I already told you." "But Anthony, you are 4 years old. This happened a long time ago before you were born. I know it doesn't make sense, but I was there. I was a firefighter. My name was different. I was bigger. I was an adult. Then the building collapsed. Everything went dark. Then I was here. I was a baby and I don't understand, but it is true." Dr. Torres put down his pen. This was more complicated than a simple fabrication. The child's distress was real. But genuine belief in a false memory was still a false memory. Anthony, I am going to show you some pictures. If you recognize anything, I want you to tell me, okay? He had prepared some photos. Some were from the 11th of September, some were of other buildings, other disasters, other times. He showed the photos one by one. He watched the child's face closely, trying to see if he recognized anything. He showed no reaction to an ordinary office building. He showed no reaction to the Pentagon building. He showed no reaction to the Oklahoma City bombing. When he showed a random skyscraper fire from the 1980s, there was still no reaction. Then he showed a photo of the World Trade Center lobby, taken in the summer of 2001 before the attacks. It was an innocent image, just marble floors and high ceilings, nothing dramatic or traumatic. Anthony's breath caught. That is the lobby. I walked through it. The fire department got the call. We walked through it and got on the elevator. The elevator was very slow. We knew people were dying while we were waiting there. Dr. Torres took notes. He recognized the WTC lobby. Then he showed the next photo. A carefully selected photo of firefighters from a different department, a different city, a different decade. Do you recognize these men? Anthony studied the photo. He shook his head. Number? Are you sure? Take your time. They're firefighters, but they're not from my company. The badges are wrong. The trucks are wrong. Dr. Torres noticed something. How could a 4-year-old child know about firefighter badges? He spent the next hour asking questions designed to uncover false memories, which he called integrity tests. What color were the fire trucks? What was the equipment like? What were the sounds like? He asked trick questions. He added false suggestions. He tried to get the child to make mistakes. Anthony didn't hesitate. Worse, he corrected Dr. Torres when he deliberately said something wrong. No, South Carolina bottles aren't red, they're yellow. And they don't strap onto your back like a normal backpack. They have a frame. They're heavy. Everything is very heavy. Self-contained breathing apparatus. This wasn't general knowledge. It wasn't something a child would know unless specifically taught. Why would anyone teach a 5-year-old the technical name for firefighting equipment? By the time the evaluation ended at noon, Dr. Torres was no longer sure of anything. Mr. and Mrs. Russo, I'll be honest with you. This doesn't fit any standard profile I've encountered. The level of detail, emotional consistency, technical knowledge, it is all extremely unusual. I can't explain it using traditional developmental psychology. Patricia asked in a worried tone. So what do we do? Dr. Torres hesitated. What he was about to suggest violated every scientific principle he had built his career upon. But in this case, something demanded more than rejection. There are confidential and sealed records. The fire department reports from that day were kept confidential for 20 years due to the ongoing lawsuit and sensitivity concerns. These records are held by the FDNY and the National Institute of Standards and Technology. If your son's memories are accurate, if he is truly describing specific events inside those buildings, then there should be corroborating evidence in those files. Can we access these records? Vincent asked. It is not easy, but I have a colleague, a former student of mine. She does research in disaster psychology. She has connections with the FDNY Historical Archives. If I submit a request under the Freedom of Information Act, we might get limited access to some of the reports, particularly those related to Ladder Company 4 and Captain O'Brien. Patricia looked at her son, whose small face was tired. Okay, she said, we need to know. Dr. Torres called that afternoon. The investigation had officially begun. The flight to New York was Anthony's first plane ride. Patricia held his hand during takeoff. She watched him closely for any signs of distress. But the child seemed calm, almost resigned. In February 2010, the access request was approved with heavy restrictions. They were granted access to Ladder Company 4's dispatch reports, radio logs, and some post-incident documents. They could review them under supervision at the FDNY Fire Museum in Lower Manhattan. At the museum, they met Dr. Elaine Vasquez, Dr. Torres's colleague, a disaster psychologist who had worked with the first responders after the attacks. She was in her 50s, with silver hair, and had seen a great deal of grief. She was a woman with tired eyes. Hello, Miss Russo. I read Dr. Torres's report. I'll be honest with you. I came here because I want to scientifically disprove this, but I also came here because 23 firefighters from my team died that day. If there is any chance that consciousness continues in some way, I need to know." She looked at Anthony. "Hello, young man," Anthony politely said. "Hello, ma'am." They were led into a small, climate-controlled room in the museum's research section. An archivist had prepared the materials. There were volumes, file folders, plastic, covered radio transcripts, maps of towers marked with handwritten notes. Dr. Vasquez started with the least traumatic materials. He was laying a foundation and watching to see if Anthony reacted to them. Anthony didn't react. He just looked bored. Then he opened one of the radio recordings. "Anthony, I am going to read something to you. I want you to tell me if it sounds familiar." "Okay. Okay." He read the transcript from the section recorded on the 11th of September 2001 at 9:37 am ladder 4 to Manhattan. "We are on the 47th floor of the North Tower and stairwell B, structural integrity compromised. Metal supports damaged by heat. Stairs unstable. Numerous civilians trapped above, requesting additional units." Anthony's face paled. "That was Captain O'Brien," he whispered. "I was right next to him when he said that. The radio kept cutting out. We could barely hear the response." Dr. Vasquez's hand trembled slightly as he placed the paper on the table. He looked at Patricia, then back at the boy. "Anthony, this recording wasn't made public. It was sealed." "How do you know that?" "Because I was there. Why doesn't anyone believe me? I was there. I remember." And then, without warning, he began to cry. But these were not the tears of a child having a tantrum. These were the tears of someone carrying an unbearable burden. "We couldn't reach them," he sobbed. "The people on the upper floors, they were trapped, and we couldn't reach them. Then the South Tower collapsed. We heard it. We knew we couldn't get out." Dr. Vasquez suddenly stood up and left the room. Patricia could see him through the glass window. He was standing in the hallway, his hand over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. When he returned 5 minutes later, his eyes were red. "Miss Russo, I want you to know something. That radio communication I just read wasn't widely documented. It was one of hundreds of partial communications that morning. The only people who know the full text are the dispatchers who recorded it and the researchers who examined the sealed transcripts." "What are you saying?" "I am saying your son confirmed information he had no way of accessing, but there is more. I haven't finished reading the transcript." Holding his hand steadier, he picked up the paper again. "The communication continues. Captain O'Brien to Manhattan. We're trying to access the emergency equipment storage. The stairwells are blocked. We're looking for an alternate route. There is a blue-walled communications relay room on this floor. We're trying to get in now." This was the last communication received from Captain O'Brien or any member of his unit. Patricia's heart stopped. "A blue room." Dr. Vasquez slowly shook his head. According to architectural records and NIST investigation reports, there were several mechanical and communications transfer rooms in the towers. These rooms were typically painted specific colors for identification purposes. Blue represented communications equipment. However, these rooms were not marked on standard floor plans. Only building engineers and emergency personnel specially trained on these structures knew their locations. Patricia turned to her son. "Do you remember a blue room?" The child wiped his tears with the back of his hand and shook his head. "We went there to find another radio because ours was broken, but the door was jammed. The frame was warped from the heat. We couldn't get in. Then the building started making a groaning sound. Captain O'Brien said we had to move, that we had to go downstairs." His voice trailed off, his small body trembling. Dr. Vasquez slowly stood up. "Wait here," he said. He left the room again. When he returned, he had something in his hand, a large file with official seals and warnings that only authorized personnel could access. "This is the NIST Structural Engineering Report, Appendix F, subsection 47B, he said. "These are architectural plans retrieved from the Port Authority archives. They show the locations of the auxiliary equipment rooms." He pointed to a specific mark on the floor plan of the North Tower's 47th floor. Next to stairwell B, a small square room marked in blue ink. "Communication Relay Station 47 Bravo," he read. "For identification, interior walls are painted security blue. Access is restricted to authorized personnel." Patricia stared at the small blue square. It was proof that her son was telling the truth, something specific he should never have known. Dr. Vasquez, Miss Russo, what I am about to show you will be difficult. Are you ready? Patricia nodded, though she was no longer sure she was ready for anything. Dr. Vasquez pulled out a piece of paper. It looked like a photocopy of a handwritten note. This was found among the personal belongings in Captain Michael O'Brien's locker at Ladder Company 4 Fire Station. It was written before the 11th of September. It appears to have been left for his family in case something happened. His widow donated these documents to the FDNY Museum archives in 2008. This note has never been published. Very few people have seen it. He placed the paper on the table. The handwriting was hurried but clear. Family, if you are reading this, it means I did not make it home. I want you to know I am not afraid. This was the job I had to do, taking care of people, making sure they get home safely. That is what matters. I hope that when my time comes, I'll go doing what I love, and I hope that wherever I go, I'll have the chance to do it again. Love, Mike. Patricia looked at her son, this 4-year-old boy who carried the memories of a man who wrote these words years before he was born. Anthony, is there anything you'd like to draw for Dr. Vasquez? The boy nodded. He took a crayon and a piece of paper. He began to draw. He worked quietly for a few minutes. His little hand moved with surprising precision. It was a room. 4 walls painted entirely in blue crayon. In the middle, he had drawn equipment, boxes, shelves. On the right side, there was a door with a heavy frame, slightly ajar, marked with an X. At the bottom of the page, in careful preschool handwriting, he had written, "We couldn't get in. The door is stuck." There was too much smoke. Dr. Vasquez took the drawing with trembling hands. He placed it next to the blueprint, the radio transcript, and Captain O'Brien's note. The evidence was undeniable. The connection was impossible to ignore. He had never been to New York. He had never been taught anything about the 11th of September. He had no access to sealed fire department records or secret architectural plans. A 4-year-old child living in Pennsylvania had confirmed events that occurred before he was born. Dr. Vasquez looked at Patricia. For the first time in his career as a scientist, he had no explanation to offer. Mrs. Russo, I don't know how to tell you this, but your son is remembering something real, something he experienced, and there is no framework theory or scientific explanation for it. Anthony looked at both of them, his young face tired and sad. Can I go home now? He asked quietly. I don't want to remember anymore. It hurts. Patricia took her son in her arms. She held him tight. She held this little boy who carried the weight of a man's last day. We can go home. But they both knew nothing would ever be the same again. Anthony Russo is now 15 years old. He lives a quiet life with his family in the same house in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The nightmares ended when he was 7. He no longer talks about Captain O'Brien. When asked about those years, the memories that consumed his childhood, he says it feels like something he saw in a movie, something that happened to someone else. But he still avoids fires. He has never been to New York. Dr. Vasquez published an article about this case in the Journal of Consciousness Studies in 2013. He approached his findings with caution. He presented the evidence without exaggeration. He let the facts speak for themselves. The article sparked debate, skepticism, and surprisingly serious academic interest. Other researchers tried to find alternative explanations. None of the alternative theories were found valid under scrutiny. The Blue Room detail, the architectural feature visible in a child's drawing before anyone showed him the plans, cannot be explained by conventional means. The drawing is currently stored in a climate-controlled vault at the National the 11th of September Memorial and Museum. It bears the inscription, Child Witness, Anthony Russo, age 4, February 2010. Verified by FDNY records and NIST architectural documents. Captain Michael O'Brien's name is engraved in bronze on the memorial alongside the names of the 2976 people who died that day. His body was never recovered from the rubble. Yet, perhaps in a way that transcends our understanding of consciousness, memory, and the nature of existence, a part of him has come home. Patricia Russo has learned to live with this mystery. She now understands that some questions do not have answers that perfectly align with our expectations of how the world works. But she knows what she saw. She knows what her son remembers. And she knows that somewhere, somehow, Ladder Company 4 Captain Michael Patrick O'Brien, who died trying to rescue people trapped in a burning tower, found his way back. Perhaps not in the way anyone would expect. Perhaps not in the way any religion, philosophy, or scientific theory would predict. But he came back. He came back in the fragmented memories of a child who shouldn't remember anything. If you truly believe Anthony Russo carries these memories, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe consciousness can somehow continue after death and find a new form? The evidence is there. The Blue Room was real. The radio broadcast was real. The memories were real. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before falling asleep, Patricia still hears her son's 4-year-old voice saying those words that changed everything. Captain O'Brien tried to save me, but the building collapsed. Now I am here. I don't understand why I am here. None of us understand why we are here. But perhaps Anthony's story offers us a small glimmer of hope. The people we've lost aren't truly gone. Somewhere, in ways we can't measure, predict, or control, they find a way to come back to us. Subscribe to join us in uncovering the next mystery. Because in a world where a child can remember a death that happened before they were born, where sealed records confirm impossible information, where the boundary between past and present becomes something strange, beautiful, and frightening, there are more stories waiting to be told. Stories that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the persistence of memory. Stories like Anthony's, stories that refuse to stay buried.